Welcome back to the StockTA podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Steuer. Today, we're focusing on a critical mineral story that is fundamentally changing how North America secures its clean energy and technology supply chains. We're talking about Arianne Phosphate, ticker DAN on the TSX Venture and DRRSF in the US. Please note this interview is being disseminated on behalf of Arianne Phosphate. While the Western world scrambles to break China's 95% stranglehold on the lithium iron phosphate or LFP battery market, Arianne has spent the last few months delivering massive technical milestones. They sit on the West's largest fully permitted greenfield phosphate deposit at Lac qui Parle in Quebec. Joining me to walk us through the strategic partnerships and capital markets roadmap is Arianne's head of strategic and business initiatives, Brian Ostroff. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Kevin.
So this is an interesting story. We're introduced by a mutual friend. I don't know much about the phosphate market and how all this works. It's been in the news a lot recently. So I think a good place to start is just, can you explain to my listeners, what is phosphate?
Yeah, look, that's a great question and something that I'm getting asked quite a bit lately, which I guess is a good sign. So phosphate, generally was understood as an agricultural commodity, which makes sense. That's where most phosphate winds up. It's one of the macronutrients, so things like MAP and DAP. That's where most phosphate is used. But, there are a couple of other buckets. You can turn that phosphate into a better quality liquid, and that gets used in specialty fertilizers and animal feeds. And then at the end of the day, if you can continue to purify it up, you can get to what's called a white acid, which is a purified phosphoric acid, PPA. And that's the stuff that is used in specialty applications. So it's direct food additives, it's used in pharmaceuticals, it's actually used in the production of semiconductors, electronics, and, to your earlier comments, that's what you require for the LFP battery. Now, what's interesting is as you kind of move up that pyramid of materials. So again, from fertilizer to good quality liquid to purified, you can get higher prices for the sale of your product. And of course, that white acid commands the highest price. The challenge is phosphate itself. Not all phosphates are the same, and most phosphates can't be upgraded to that white acid. So look, that's a key driver, and that's something where as we get into Arianne, we have very pure phosphate, and we can really, really target that high-end market that, as you point out, China dominates.
This was added to the critical mineral list in, I think, November for the US and Canada. Where does a lot of the world's phosphate come from? Like, why is this such a problem all of a sudden?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I love correcting people on this. I get this a lot. It's like, well, why is this a problem all of a sudden? And you know what? This has been a problem that's been brewing for a long time. The market is now starting to focus on it. So it believes that this is a new problem. This is a problem that's been building. So most of the world doesn't have enough or any phosphate, including here in North America. So even from an agricultural perspective, we sit here and we think, oh, we grow everything we need. Yeah, you grow everything you need as long as you get your phosphate from somewhere else. And the same for South America, and the same for Western Europe, and the same for most areas in Asia. So we all do not have enough phosphate. So we're all short. Demand grows every single year. Now you've got things like the LFP, so demand's growing even more. So we're all short. We're getting shorter. So where do we get it from? And the answer is predominantly the Middle East and North Africa, MENA. So today, Morocco is by far the world's largest producer. Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia. I mean, these are the big producers. And so, my comment about this was always a risk. I mean, the Middle East historically has not been an area of calm and tranquility. And so, we're seeing that yet again. And Interestingly, this time around, we have a further challenge. So, everyone looks at what's going on in the Straits and they freak out over oil because 20% of the world's oil flows through the Straits of Hormuz. 30% of the world's phosphate fertilizer flows through there. But even more interestingly, in a concerning way, 50% of the world's sulfur flows through there. Why should your listeners care about sulfur? Well, sulfur is a key ingredient in just about everything. So without sulfur, you cannot transform your phosphate into anything, regardless whether you're talking about fertilizer or the white acid for batteries. You need sulfur. But you know what? Uranium. You need it there also, like Cigar Lake, which is the biggest uranium mine, just shut down for 3 weeks because they're not getting the sulfur. So back to phosphate, I mean, we have a real supply issue. So Mosaic, which is a leading North American-based but global phosphate company, they've been forced to reduce the amount of phosphate that they can produce. Morocco is reducing the amount of phosphate products that they can produce. So, this time around, we have a real problem and we need real answers, because if we want the critical minerals processed, we need to address this. If we want fertilizer, if we want batteries, if we want pharmaceuticals, we need to deal with this. The challenge is there are very, very, very few projects in the West that are in a position to deal with it.
So that's just an interesting macro story. That was very educational for me. So hopefully my listeners found that interesting. But you guys are sitting kind of right in that sweet spot where you can help potentially with a lot of these different log jams. So tell me a little more about your project and how you fit in that greater equation.
Yeah, great. So, for starters, we're based in Quebec, Canada. So, from a security of supply, I think we definitely check that box. Canada, Quebec, a very mining-friendly jurisdiction. Certainly the infrastructure. The project itself is well-positioned. It's just north of the Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean area in Quebec, which is a good area. Rio Tinto today is the largest employer in the region. The project itself is ideally situated in that it's a couple of hours out of the city. Paved roads, oversized haul roads. So it was far enough away from a population center where we weren't going to get the no, not in our backyard, but close enough to a population center where that needed infrastructure is already there. So there's a hydroelectric dam 30 kilometers away, oversized haul roads that have been around for 60, 70 years because of the logging industry, the Port of Saguenay, which handles large boats. So, we've been at it a long time, to your point. This project, we have been advancing for a little over 15 years. We've spent $100 million. Today we have the world's single largest greenfield phosphate deposit. We also have a fairly rare type of phosphate. So I'm sure your listeners, they probably know gold or copper a little bit better, gold, whether you dig that out of the ground in Nevada or Quebec or Russia. The stuff all trades for the same price. It's all the same. Phosphate's not the same. Each deposit can be a little bit different. Not to get too geology centric here, but we have something called an igneous deposit. Only about 4 or 5% of the world's phosphate comes from an igneous deposit. They're formed differently, but at the end of the day, what's important to understand about them is it allows for a much purer phosphate concentrate. So Arianne, I guess 2, 3 months ago, announced that we can make a 41.5% phosphate concentrate. That's the purest on the planet. The offshoot of that, again, means that we can target these high value downstream products like the white acid, the purified acid. It trades at premium prices. But the other thing that's actually very interesting is it requires less sulfuric acid to transform into whatever downstream product. So, as I've just talked about, I mean, sulfur is a growing concern. It's affecting a lot of production. The ability to have a phosphate concentrate that doesn't require as much sulfuric acid, obviously, is of huge benefit. So, you had mentioned that the US had put phosphate on its critical mineral list, as has Canada, the EU has. So there is this growing recognition of the challenges with regards to phosphate. And so, what I think is interesting here is, even from an investment perspective, like there's been a lot of talk about lithium and graphite and cobalt. And, that's understandable. But at the end of the day, there's been very little talk about phosphate. And that's starting to change because people recognize that today, you can have all the lithium that you want, but if you don't have the phosphate to go with it, you still don't have an LFP battery. But here's the rub. The rub is I can quickly name 20 good lithium projects, and there's good graphite projects and what have you. But really, how many phosphate projects are out there that have been advanced and actually have a phosphate that's capable of being turned into that purified phosphoric acid that the battery needs? And the answer to that right now is one. Arianne is the only fully permitted project in the West, the only. So yes, there are other projects out there. They are coming along. We're going to need them. But right now, Arianne is the one with the permit and the size and the quality and all of the testing.
That's amazing. You see, I know lithium was a hot commodity a couple of years ago, and you saw Tesla signing offtake agreements and these stocks just like ripping. Like, if you guys are the only ones with the phosphate, is that kind of where you see this going down the road as you continue to de-risk and permit this? Is you're going to have people lining up to take that high level phosphate from you?
Absolutely. Because look, at the end of the day, as you had alluded to in your introduction, LFP batteries, about 97% of them today come out of China. And the West is recognizing that, that's not great. That's not great for your supply chain. And today you want to make your own batteries and you need your own inputs. And so, these companies now are starting to address that. So yes, they did go and they've secured their lithium. They've learned a lot about lithium and some of these other, battery materials. I'd say that really over the last few months, that light bulb has gone on with regards to phosphate. And what is interesting, and to your point, a lot of these stocks in these other commodities have done extremely well as people have come to recognize their importance. So, yeah, I think that we are in the very early stages today with phosphate of where lithium was maybe 5 or 10 years ago. I mean, 10 years ago, the joke was lithium, it's used for medication. People didn't understand it, but they've learned and the market has grown and prices have gone up and there have been successful projects. Well, today that's what I'd say about phosphate. Yeah, most people understand that phosphate is an agricultural commodity. And of course, that's important. We all want to eat. But it's only now that they're starting to understand that it's very important, and you're not going to have batteries without it. So how many names are really out there? Because I'll tell you, the phosphate business has been a pretty rough business over the last 10, 15 years. Basically, as we advance our project, the overall phosphate market was in decline. So, I get asked this a lot, which is, well, the company seems to have hit a lot of its milestones over the last 10 years with very little recognition. Well, agreed, but it sounds like your audience will understand this. Tree falls in the forest and there's no one there to hear it. It doesn't matter. As an industry goes to sleep, as fewer and fewer people care about phosphate because of what's gone on in fertilizer, fewer and fewer people watch or care. So, you come out with great drill results and great metallurgy, and you get your permits and all of these things, and it's kind of a yawner.
I think
But
people have lost patience in it, and when that good news comes out, people just sell into it because they've kind of lost interest in it.
I think that would be a good way to categorize the last maybe 6 months.
Okay.
I would almost argue that a lot of what we've done over the last few years is just, no one there to hear it because no one really cared. And so, and again, the irony is certainly people should have always cared because it was food, but they didn't. Today it's a critical mineral, and critical minerals people start to care. And now they're starting to understand that phosphate is just as important in the battery as lithium and graphite. So, I do get phone calls, unsolicited calls, institutions, what have you, just looking to learn.
Yep.
And, at the end of the day, I think, to your point, more money is going to come to this sector as people understand, but there's so few places to put the money. It's not like deciding that I'm going to get into lithium. There's 20 interesting companies. I'm going to narrow it down to 5, and I'll place the money in the 5. Guess what? There aren't even 5 phosphate plays that you can get into that are emerging phosphate plays for batteries. So as money even starts to trickle in, it's going to very few names. And again, we're the leader. We've been at this a long time, and we're the only permitted guys. So even from a corporate perspective, at the end of the day, who are you going to call? You're going to call the company that's most advanced. That would be us.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I'm going to share my screen here because I want to show your stock price. Your ticker on the OTC is DRRSF. And it's interesting because you guys are up 61% year to date, but you're down 16% the past month. So you've had this big run up at the end of March,
Yeah.
but it didn't really hold. And I think what we are talking about earlier is, I don't know if people sold into the permitting news and some of the news releases you had, but you're kind of consolidating here. Like you have pretty good, I would say this is medium level support at 19 cents US, and then you have medium level resistance at 24 and 26. But if you can get above that, like you have a little bit of room to run here. So I'm just curious your take on the stock itself.
Yeah. So, it's interesting because, they say that a picture is worth 1,000 words. And I think what this picture is showing is something consistent with what I've said, which is, over the last few months, phosphate, like the light bulb has started to go on, and the understanding that you're going to need this for batteries. It's great that you've gone and secured all your lithium, but you're still nowhere on a battery unless you get the phosphate. And so, I think what this chart indicates is, obviously price is important, but volume's also very important. And so you see that the stocks start to wake up on quite a bit of volume. And I think that based on conversations I was having and what have you, I think that that was, you know, more, there was definitely some institutional money coming in as they were starting to look. And I would say, cutting edge retail, what's next. And so, it was trading up on extremely good volume. To your point, over the last month, it's dropped back. But again, I would look at the volume. I mean, it's coming back on almost no volume. So, I think the guys that took it up, they bought it in size. Yes, they probably cleaned out some fatigued money, and they took it higher. And now you've got a market that generally has gotten a little quieter. Traditionally the small caps during the summer, get quiet. I think that's what we've seen. But
I mean, commodities have sold off. I mean, gold, silver, wheat after, all the agricultural stuff popped in April, right when the Iran stuff started, and it ran for not even a month. And then now it's back down to it basically round tripped. So I think maybe you guys got caught up in a little bit of that. But I think it's really interesting is, I think the market priced in basically the Iran war being done. And I'm not a geopolitical expert. I'm not a war expert, but we're still having issues over there. So, I mean, I don't know what to believe in the news. I don't know what to read, but it seems like, if mines are shutting down because they don't have enough sulfur to produce stuff, that's kind of a red flag to me.
That is a red flag. But look, at the end of the day, I'd say this. This has always been a troubled part of the world. I think that I don't know how many times things can go wrong before people, or investors start to say, this is a real problem. Like we had Arab Spring in 2011, and that was a problem. And, we forgot about it. We've had several issues in the Middle East. You had Russia going into the Ukraine. Like these are consistent issues, but, it seems like, to your point, as soon as it's done, people forget. I don't think people are going to forget so quickly this time. And I think that they are going to look for alternatives. So, at the end of the day, the straits get fixed or they don't get fixed. But I think that companies, even investors, are not going to get caught there again. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And look, things aren't wonderful. East, West, China, they've already cut back or outright halted the export of some critical minerals.
They blacklisted a couple of U.S. companies that I own, so that hasn't been good.
There you go. So look, at the end of the day, the LFP is a game changer, right? It's not just EVs. But when you talk batteries, most people default to the electric vehicles. But, if you look at the LFP, yes, EVs are definitely causing growth to the LFP, but what's really causing that growth? Energy storage systems. And so energy storage systems, 90% of energy storage systems today run off of LFPs. And that market is booming because more and more the question is, how are we going to get the power that we need for whatever it is that we're doing? And the answer is residentially, you're going to put solar panels up on your roof. Great. You need LFPs because you're going to capture that energy, but you need to store it. But more so,
it too.
Yeah, and more so like industrial, right? Where you all want to build these data centers, and that's great, and we need them, and AI, and what have you. But the first question that comes to someone's mind when you hear, oh, we want to build the data center. First of all, now there's pushback. The pushback is because the average guy doesn't want their electricity grid taxed because of that. So the answer is what you're going to do is you're going to build those data centers in the Sun Belt. And you're going to build a solar farm right beside that data center, which is why Drill Baby Drill Texas is actually the largest deployer of energy storage systems, because everyone is putting up these solar farms so that they can build their data centers. That means LFP, and that means P, and that means you need purified phosphoric acid. And at the end of the day, I mean, not very much phosphate that gets mined is actually of a superior enough quality to make its way to white acid. And so, once again, Arianne's in a pretty unique position here, because it is the world's biggest, it is the world's purest, it is the world's safest, it is the world's only, or I shouldn't say the world, is the West's only fully permitted mine. So, as we look to get serious about this, like we know who the first phone call is. And by the way, we've spent $100 million getting to this point. And so the market isn't even rewarding us with the amount that we've put in yet.
I think this is a really interesting play. I'm really glad you came on the show, because I learned a lot today. So this has been one of my favorite interviews to do, because this is an area I didn't know much about, and I think you did a really good job explaining it. So just for my listeners, if they want to learn more about your company, where can they find out, kind of follow your progress?
Yeah, so certainly they can go to our website, www.arianne-inc.com. We're pretty good about getting out our press releases. We've had a lot of news over the last few months. I suspect there's more coming. We've got some interesting partnerships underway that we've been able to announce. We've received support from government. Quebec government owns 5% of us. So that website will give them the info that they need, the general info they need. Our presentation is on that. Certainly I think that it is a commodity that is going to, continue to receive some interest. And again, there's just so few ways to participate in it. And I think Arianne's going to be a key beneficiary.
Well, awesome. Brian, thank you so much for coming on the show. That's it for today. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss our next CEO deep dive. I'm Kevin Steuer. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.